Hello.
I built the perfect life in Seattle. Successful IT career, beautiful wife, and a son I adored. Then came the anonymous video link that shattered everything. Footage of my wife with another man spread like wildfire through our social circles. When the paternity test results landed on my desk, I made the hardest decision of my life. I disappeared completely. 15 years of carefully constructed walls and a new identity in Boston kept the pain at bay. Until the day an 18-year-old with my face showed up at my door, holding a truth that would turn my carefully rebuilt world upside down. My name is Felix Hawkins. I'm 38 years old, and for 15 years, I worked as a senior network administrator for a Fortune 500 company in Seattle. Good pay, solid benefits, and enough technical challenges to keep my mind busy. I thought I had it all figured out: career, marriage, family. Boy, was I wrong. The first red flag appeared on a rainy Tuesday in November. I came home early from work after our server upgrade finished ahead of schedule. The house was quiet, but Joanna's car was in the driveway. Strange. She was supposed to be working a 12-hour shift at Northwest Medical Center. "Joe," I called out, dropping my laptop bag by the door. No answer. I headed upstairs, hearing the shower running. When I opened our bedroom door, I spotted her scrubs scattered across the floor, along with her phone face down on the nightstand. Something didn't feel right. I picked up her phone, no password. We'd always had an open phone policy, and saw 3 missed calls from someone named Mark D. Not a name I recognized from her hospital colleagues. When Joanna emerged from the bathroom, she nearly jumped out of her skin. "Felix, what are you doing home?" Her voice cracked, eyes darting to her phone in my hand. "Server migration finished early." "Who's Mark D?" She snatched the phone. "Just a new doctor at work. Nothing important." That night, I watched her delete text messages before plugging in her phone. The next morning, she changed her password. Over the next 3 months, the excuses piled up like Seattle snowfall. Extra shifts that didn't appear on her paycheck. Grocery runs that took 2 hours with nothing to show for it. Girls' nights with coworkers whose names kept changing. Our 3-year-old son, Russell, started asking why mommy was always gone, and I had no good answers. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I needed to know. While Joanna slept, I installed tracking software on her laptop, the kind we use at work to monitor remote employees. Within days, I discovered emails between her and Mark, planning meetups while I was supposed to be working late. One email hit me like a gut punch. "Felix suspects nothing. He's too buried in his computer screens to notice us." I confronted her with printouts of the emails on a Sunday morning while Russell was at my parents' place. I expected tears, apologies, perhaps even a plea to work things out. Instead, Joanna laughed. "Took you long enough to figure it out, tech genius." That laugh would haunt me for years to come. I always believed problems could be solved with logic and determination. That's how I approach my career in IT. Troubleshoot, identify the issue, implement a solution. But nothing in my technical training prepared me for what happened next. My brother Derek, a cybersecurity specialist, called me during my lunch break. "Felix, check your email now." His voice sounded grave. I opened my inbox to find a link with no subject line. When I clicked it, my hands went numb. There on my screen was Joanna, naked and entangled with her doctor friend Mark. The 10-second clip showed everything, her wedding ring clearly visible as she ran her hands through his hair. "Where did you get this?" I demanded, voice barely audible. "It's all over Twitter. Some private group leak. I've been trying to get it taken down, but it's spreading fast." I slammed my laptop shut and rushed to the bathroom, barely making it before emptying my stomach. After splashing cold water on my face, I made 2 calls, first to my lawyer, then to my parents to make sure Russell stayed with them. By the time I pulled into our driveway, 3 of my coworkers had texted me links to the video. Our neighbors avoided eye contact as I walked to my front door. Joanna sat on our couch, mascara streaking down her face, phone clutched in her hand. "Felix, I can explain." I cut her off. "Pack your things. You have 30 minutes. You can't just throw me out. This is my house, too." I placed my phone on the coffee table, pulled up the deed I'd purchased before our marriage. "My name only. 30 minutes. What about Russell?" Her voice trembled. "He stays with me until the court decides otherwise." She tried to touch my arm. "Please, Felix, think about." I stepped back. 29 minutes. While she packed, I transferred half our joint savings to a new account. Fair, but not a penny more. Then I changed the locks, security codes, and Wi-Fi password. As an IT professional, I made sure she couldn't access our digital lives again. When she drove away in her packed car, I didn't watch. Instead, I called my lawyer again and instructed him to file for divorce immediately, citing infidelity with documented evidence. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. Marks, I assumed. She's with me now. Man to man, this isn't personal. I replied simply, check your credit score tomorrow. Then I deployed a script I'd created years ago for a security demo that would flag suspicious activity on his accounts. Nothing illegal, just enough digital mayhem to keep him busy for months. When Russell came home the next day, I sat him down and explained that Mommy would be living somewhere else for a while. I didn't mention the video or call her names. A real man doesn't poison his son against his mother, no matter what she's done. But I had one more task to complete, a paternity test. The doubt had been planted, and I needed to know. The divorce moved at lightning speed. My attorney, Michael, was ruthless and efficient. With the video evidence, Joanna had no real leverage, though she fought for every penny. Your client violated the fidelity clause in the prenup, Michael told her lawyer during mediation. Mr. Hawkins has been more than generous with his offer. Joanna glared at me across the table. You never loved me. This is what you wanted all along. I didn't dignify that with a response. The judge granted the divorce on my terms. Joanna got her car, personal possessions, and 6 months of support. I kept the house, my investments, and most importantly, temporary custody of Russell pending further arrangements. Then came the moment that shattered what remained of my world. The paternity test results arrived in a plain envelope. I opened it alone in my office, the Seattle rain drumming against the windows. Probability of paternity, 0%. The floor seemed to drop from beneath me. Russell, the boy who called me daddy, whose nightmares I soothed, whose little league games I never missed, wasn't mine. 5 years of memories suddenly felt like a cruel joke. I added the paternity evidence to our case. Not to hurt Russell. I never do that, but to establish the complete extent of Joanna's deception. The final court hearing was brief but devastating. In light of the evidence presented, the judge said, I'm granting Mr. Hawkins' petition for full financial separation, with the agreed-upon temporary support. Outside the courthouse, Joanna grabbed my arm. You have to let me see Russell regularly. He needs his mother. We'll follow the visitation schedule, 2 weekends a month. Her eyes narrowed. That's not enough. It's more than Mark gets. His wife called me yesterday. He's working on his marriage. Tough break. That night, I watched Russell sleep, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. He had no idea his world had just been turned upside down. I made a silent vow to remain his father in every way that mattered, regardless of DNA. But one question haunted me. Who was Russell's real father? And did he even know he had a son? I couldn't stay in Seattle. Every street corner, coffee shop, and park bench held memories now tainted by betrayal. Worse were the whispers at work and the pitying glances from neighbors who'd seen the video. My breaking point came at Russell's favorite playground. Another father pulled his kid away from the sandbox where Russell was playing. We don't associate with that family, I heard him say. That night, I made my decision. I would lift without a trace after divorcing my cheating wife. No forwarding address, no social media trail, nothing. The next morning, I requested a transfer from my HR director. I need to leave Seattle. Immediately. She nodded, unsurprised. Boston office has a senior position open. 20% salary increase. I'll take it. Within 2 weeks, I sold our house for a quick close, deleted all social media, changed my email addresses, and got a new phone number. I even hired a privacy attorney to minimize my digital footprint. The hardest decision was Russell. After agonizing deliberation and legal consultation, I made the gut-wrenching choice to leave him with Joanna. Not because I didn't love him, God knows I did, but because a prolonged custody battle over a child who wasn't biologically mine would only hurt him more. I arranged a trust fund for his education, administered by my brother. Then I wrote Russell a letter explaining that I would always love him, to be open when he turned 18. On my last day in Seattle, I drove to Joanna's apartment for a final goodbye. I'm moving east, I said at her doorstep. I won't be using my visitation rights. Her face showed confusion, then understanding. The paternity test. Russell deserves better than a part-time father who resents his mother. The trust fund details are with my attorney. As I turned to leave, she called after me. Felix, I really am sorry. I didn't look back. So am I. 3 days later, I boarded a flight to Boston with 2 suitcases and a steely determination. The old Felix, trusting, open, naive, was gone. In his place stood a fortress that no one would breach again. My new apartment overlooked the Charles River. No photos on the walls, no social media accounts, no friends asking about my past. I was a ghost, and that's exactly how I wanted it. Boston in winter was brutally different from Seattle's gentle rain. 6 months after my arrival, I still wasn't used to the biting cold that cut through layers of clothing. But the physical discomfort served as a fitting parallel to my emotional state. Frozen, hardened, impenetrable. My apartment near Copley Square was Spartan, but functional. No photos on the walls, minimal furniture, nothing personal except my computer equipment. My colleagues at the Boston office knew me only as the efficient, somewhat distant transfer from Seattle. I kept conversations professional and declined happy hour invitations with practiced excuses. "You're like a ghost, Hawkins," my project manager remarked after I delivered a system upgrade 3 days ahead of schedule. All work, no trace of a personal life. I merely nodded. I prefer focusing on results. Nights were the hardest. In the quiet hours, memories of Russell would ambush me. His laugh when I tickled him, his serious expression when concentrating on a puzzle, his small hand gripping mine as we crossed streets. I checked the trust fund statements religiously, making sure everything was in order for his future, but I never contacted him. Clean breaks heal fastest. I filled the void with punishing physical routines. Every morning before work, I ran 5 miles along the Charles River, regardless of weather. Weekends found me at a boxing gym in Southie, where the trainer, a former middleweight contender named Sal, put me through brutal conditioning. "You hit that bag like it owes you money," Sal commented one Saturday after I demolished my knuckles for 2 hours straight. "Something like that," I replied, unwrapping my hands. He studied me with knowing eyes. "Woman trouble." I nearly laughed. "Former woman trouble." "Best kind," he nodded. "Keep coming. You're getting good." Beyond work and boxing, I started rebuilding my technical skills. I developed security applications in my spare time, creating programs that could protect sensitive information from exactly the kind of exposure I'd experienced. The irony wasn't lost on me. Dating was out of the question. A few women at work had shown interest, but I shut them down immediately. Trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. My world had narrowed to a comfortable, controlled routine where surprises and emotional entanglements couldn't reach me. One snowy Tuesday evening, I was coding at a coffee shop when a barista placed a fresh Americano on my table. "I didn't order this," I said without looking up. "Courtesy of the lady by the window," she replied. "Said you looked like you needed it." I glanced over to see a woman with auburn hair reading a book, completely absorbed. She didn't look up, made no attempt to catch my eye or initiate conversation. Just a random act of kindness with no strings attached. I almost returned the coffee and used. Almost. Instead, I took a sip and continued coding. Baby steps. As winter thawed into spring, I established a reputation as the go-to problem solver at work. The promotion came with an office overlooking the city and a substantial raise I didn't particularly need. Money was just another number now, like lines of code or miles run. I had everything a successful man was supposed to want: career advancement, financial security, independence. Yet standing in my office window one evening, watching people hurry home to their families, I realized the fortress I'd built around myself was starting to feel less like protection and more like a prison of my own making. 2 years in Boston, and my life had settled into a comfortable monotony. Apartment to office to gym, repeat. Weekends were for longer workouts and coding projects. Holidays were just extra days to catch up on work. I've been promoted twice, each time with a larger office and greater responsibilities. My colleagues respected me, but kept their distance, sensing the invisible barrier I maintained. Then came the day I arrived at my usual coffee shop to find someone in my regular corner spot. The woman with auburn hair, the one who'd bought me coffee months before. I hesitated, then took the next table over, opening my laptop without acknowledging her. "You can ask me to move," she said without looking up from her book. I know it's your spot. It's a public place, I replied stiffly. She glanced up, green eyes studying me with unexpected intensity. Grace Winters, she said, extending her hand. You're Felix Hawkins. You work at Nexus Technologies. Senior security architect. I tensed immediately. How do you know that? A slight smile touched her lips. I'm the new head of legal at Nexus. I make it my business to know the key personnel, especially the ones everyone describes as brilliant but impossible to know. Against my better judgment, I shook her hand. I prefer to keep work and personal life separate. Hence the coffee shop 3 neighborhoods away from the office, she nodded. Don't worry, I'm not here to intrude. Professional curiosity, that's all. Something about her directness disarmed me. No flirtation, no pity, just straightforward communication. We worked in silence for an hour, until she closed her book and gathered her things. Nice meeting you officially, Felix. See you at the Morrison briefing next week. After she left, I realized I'd been more relaxed in her presence than I'd been around anyone in years. Grace became a fixture of the coffee shop, sometimes nodding hello, sometimes sitting elsewhere, respecting my space while somehow making me aware of her presence. At work, she was thoroughly professional, brilliant at navigating the legal complications of our security contracts. One rainy evening, we ended up sharing an Uber after a late meeting. Sitting beside her in the back seat, watching the city lights blur through rain-streaked windows, I felt something stir inside me. Not attraction exactly, but a crack in the ice. Why did you move to Boston? She asked as the car crawled through traffic. Fresh start. I answered automatically. She studied me. Running from something, or towards something. Doesn't matter. Always. One is reactive, the other proactive. They lead to different destinations. I almost told her then, about Joanna, about Russell, about the whole sordid mess. Instead, I said both, maybe. What about you? My husband died 3 years ago. Car accident. I needed a change of scenery. She said it matter-of-factly, without the expectation of sympathy that usually accompanied such revelations. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. She shrugged slightly. Life happens. We adapt, or we don't. When the car stopped at my building, I hesitated. Would you like to get coffee sometime? Not our usual place. Somewhere different. Grace looked surprised, then pleased. I'd like that. Tomorrow, walking to my apartment, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not healed, not by a long shot, but perhaps ready to consider the possibility that healing might someday be an option. That night, for the first time since leaving Seattle, I dreamed of Russell. Not nightmares of loss, but simple memories of happier times. I woke with tears on my face, but a strange sense of peace in my chest. One coffee date with Grace turned into weekly meetings, then dinners, then weekend hikes along the Charles River. We moved slowly, cautiously, like two people who'd been burned before and were wary of the flames. Grace never pushed for details about my past, but over time, small fragments spilled out. During a rainy Sunday afternoon at a museum, I mentioned Russell for the first time. I had a son, not biologically, but in every way that mattered. She absorbed this without visible reaction. You still have him. The relationship has changed, not ended. Her response caught me off guard. I haven't seen him in over 3 years. That was your choice, Felix, she said gently. Not an irreversible one. 6 months into knowing Grace, I finally told her everything. The video, the divorce, the paternity test, my decision to vanish. We sat on my apartment balcony late into the night, her face illuminated by city lights as she listened without judgment. When I finished, she remained silent for a long moment. What do you miss most? Russell's laugh. I answered without hesitation. The way he'd run to the door when I came home from work. She touched my hand tentatively. Trauma doesn't define you unless you let it. You've been letting it. Something broke inside me, a dam containing 3 years of suppressed grief. For the first time since leaving Seattle, I allowed myself to truly feel the loss. Grace held me through it, steady and present. The next morning, I called my brother Derek. How is he? Derek sounded surprised, but relieved. Russell's good. Growing like a weed. Started baseball this year. And Joanna? Remarried 6 months ago. Nice enough guy. Insurance adjuster or something. Russell seems to like him. The news should have hurt, But instead I felt an unexpected lightness. Joanna had moved on. Maybe it was time I did too. With Grace's encouragement, I began rebuilding myself. Not just the protective fortress I'd become, but something new. I joined a community coding program, teaching tech skills to underprivileged kids. I reconnected with old friends from college via email. Small steps toward being human again. Grace had her own ghosts. Her husband's death had left her with lingering guilt about their final argument. We recognized in each other the particular kind of scar tissue that forms around life's worst moments. Our first kiss happened on Boston Common in early spring, cherry blossoms drifting around us like snow. I hadn't kissed anyone since Joanna, and the sensation was both familiar and entirely new. I'm not fixed, I warned her afterward. I don't know if I ever will be. Grace smiled, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. Nobody's fixed, Felix. We're all works in progress. That summer, I was offered a promotion that would make me CTO of the entire East Coast division. The old Felix would have accepted immediately, diving deeper into work as a substitute for living. Instead, I negotiated a balanced arrangement that preserved my evenings and weekends. One night, after Grace had fallen asleep beside me, I opened my laptop and navigated to the trust fund I'd established for Russell. I added a new provision: educational support for any extracurricular activities he might choose. It wasn't direct contact, but it was something, a crack in the wall I'd built. When Grace stirred beside me, she found me staring at an old photo of Russell I'd kept buried in a password-protected folder. "He has your smile," she said softly. "He's not biologically mine," I reminded her. "Family isn't always about biology," she countered. "Sometimes it's about who shows up." Her words settled into me, a truth I'd been avoiding for years. 15 years disappeared faster than I could have imagined. Boston became home. My relationship with Grace evolved into something I never thought I'd have again: trust, partnership, contentment. We married in a small ceremony by the harbor, attended only by her parents, my brother Derek, and a handful of close friends. Grace accepted a partnership at her law firm, while I continued as CTO at Nexus. We bought a brownstone in Cambridge, renovating it room by room on weekends. I'd learned to enjoy simple pleasures again: gardening in our small backyard, Sunday crosswords, planning vacations to places neither of us had visited. Life felt stable, predictable, safe. Until the day everything changed with a single knock at our door. It was a crisp autumn Saturday. Grace was attending a legal conference in New York, leaving me alone for the weekend. I was in the basement setting up a new server when the doorbell rang. Probably a package delivery, I thought, wiping my hands on a rag as I headed upstairs. When I opened the door, the world tilted beneath my feet. Standing on my porch was a young man, maybe 18 or 19, with features so familiar they stopped my breath. The same jawline I saw in the mirror every morning. The same cowlick at the crown of his head that never stayed flat. "Mr. Hawkins?" he asked, his voice deeper than I remembered, but with the same slight inflection. "I'm Russell." Time seemed to compress, 18 years collapsing into seconds. The little boy I taught to ride a bike now stood eye to eye with me, a young adult on the threshold of his life. "Russell," I managed, my throat suddenly dry. "How did you find me?" "It wasn't easy," he said with a hint of pride. "But I'm studying computer science at MIT now. I've been coding since I was 10, and finding people online became a bit of an obsession when I started wondering about you. Took me months of digging through encrypted records and data trails to track you down." My heart stuttered. MIT, just across the river. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd been practically in my backyard for months without my knowledge. "Would you like to come in?" I asked, stepping back from the doorway. He followed me to the kitchen, his eyes taking in everything: the family photos with Grace, the sophisticated security system, the evidence of the life I'd built without him. "Coffee?" I offered, desperate for something to do with my hands. "Sure." Silence stretched between us as I busied myself with the coffee maker. When I finally placed a mug in front of him, he pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I got your letter when I turned 18, he said. "Mom kept it all these years, like you asked." The letter I'd written before leaving Seattle, explaining that I wasn't his biological father, but would always love him, including contact information for Derek to manage the trust fund. "I read it about 50 times, Russell continued. "Then I started digging. Found the real paternity test results in Mom's closet. My hands froze around my mug. Real results. Russell's eyes met mine directly. The ones showing you are my biological father. 99.99% probability. The kitchen seemed to tilt sideways. That's not possible. I saw the test myself. Mom admitted everything after I confronted her. She doctored the results. She was having an affair, but it was never physical enough for me to be anyone's but yours. She panicked when you found out. Thought you'd take me away from her completely. My 18-year-old son discovered the truth that had been hidden from both of us. A truth that had altered the entire course of our lives. It can't be true, I said, shaking my head. But the evidence Russell showed me was irrefutable. Detailed medical reports, the original test results, and even a signed confession from Joanna admitting everything. Mom freaked out when I confronted her, Russell explained, his hands wrapped around the coffee mug. She broke down completely. Said the affair was real, but the paternity results were fake. She doctored them when she realized you might take me from her. So all these years. I couldn't finish the sentence. 15 years lost, based on a lie. Russell nodded. She figured you demanded a DNA test after finding out about Mark. So she paid someone at the lab to create false results. I stood abruptly, needing to move, to process this earthquake reshaping my reality. Russell, the boy I'd walked away from, convinced he wasn't mine, was my flesh and blood. I didn't just come to tell you this, Russell said, setting his mug down. I wanted to know why you never tried to find me, even thinking I wasn't yours. You raised me for 5 years. Didn't that mean anything? The quiet hurt in his voice cut deeper than any accusation could. I sat back down, forcing myself to meet his eyes, my eyes, in a younger face. I thought making a clean break was best for you. I said finally. A boy deserves a whole father, not a weekend visitor filled with resentment. The trust fund was my way of still providing for you without confusing your life. Providing isn't the same as being there. I flinched at the simple truth. You're right. I was protecting myself, not you. I was a coward. Russell studied me, weighing my honesty. Mom said you were the best father until everything fell apart. That's why I needed to find you, to understand what happened to that man. The unexpected grace in his words broke something inside me. I don't know if that man still exists, Russell, but I'd like you to meet who I am now, if you want to. He nodded slowly. I think I'd like that. I called Grace that night, struggling to explain what had happened. She caught the earliest train back from New York, arriving at our doorstep with determination in her eyes. I want to meet him, she said simply. Over the next week, Russell became a careful addition to our lives. We shared dinners, exchanged stories, began the delicate work of building something new from the ashes of what was lost. He showed me his coding projects, his pride when he described his MIT scholarship, his patient explanations of the latest tech I'd fallen behind on. One evening, as Grace cleared dinner plates, Russell asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you regret leaving Seattle? Leaving me? The kitchen went silent. Grace paused, watching me with concern. Every single day, I answered honestly. But I can't change the past. I can only decide what happens now. He nodded, processing this. I had a good childhood. My stepdad, he's decent. Tried his best. But there was always something missing. He hesitated. Mom kept all your letters to the trust fund administrator. I read them. You asked about me every month for 18 years. I hadn't realized Joanna had shared those. Each letter to my brother had included questions about Russell's health, schooling, activities, detached and formal, but persistent. You never really left completely, Russell said quietly. That's why I knew finding you wasn't a lost cause. When he stood to leave that night, I did something I hadn't done in 18 years. I hugged my son, feeling the solid reality of him against the hollow space I'd carried for 15 years. 3 months after Russell's appearance on my doorstep, Grace and I sat in the audience at MIT's robotics competition. Russell's team was presenting their project, an adaptive security system ironically similar to ones I designed years ago. I couldn't help the surge of pride as he confidently answered the judges' questions. He's exactly like you, Grace whispered, squeezing my hand. Right down to that little frown when he's concentrating. The journey hadn't been easy. Russell and I had spent countless hours talking through the past, working through hurt and misunderstandings. I'd had to face the consequences of my decision to disappear, while he'd had to reconcile the father he'd imagined with the flawed man before him. When his team won first place, Russell's eyes found mine in the crowd. The simple nod we exchanged spoke volumes. Acknowledgement, respect, connection. After the ceremony, we celebrated at our favorite restaurant near Harvard Square. Russell brought his girlfriend, Sarah, a brilliant engineering student who reminded me of Joanna before everything went wrong. "I have news," Russell announced over dessert. "I got the internship at Nexus this summer. My company. My department." He'd applied without telling me, determined to earn it on his own merit. "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "They only take the best." Later that night, after the kids left, Grace and I sat on our back porch with glasses of wine. "You've come a long way," she observed. "Both of you." I nodded, reflecting on the past months. "I keep thinking about all the years I missed." "You can't get them back," she said gently. "But you have now. In the future." The following weekend, I did something I never imagined possible. I called Joanna. Our conversation was brief, but civil, the first in nearly 2 decades. We agreed to meet when she visited Russell for family weekend in the fall. The real test came at Thanksgiving, when Russell asked if he could bring his mother and stepfather to our home. Grace immediately said yes before I could form a response. "Are you sure?" I asked her later. "Family is complicated," she replied simply. "But still family." Watching Joanna enter our home was surreal, like worlds colliding. She'd aged in the 15 years since I'd seen her, but still looked well, seemed happier than I remembered. Her husband, Paul, was a quiet, decent man who clearly adored her. The conversation was stilted at first, weighted with history, but gradually eased as Grace expertly guided us toward neutral topics. After dinner, Russell pulled out the letter I'd written him 18 years ago. "I think it's time we put this away," he said, handing it to me. "We don't need it anymore." In that moment, I realized something profound. The man I was before leaving Seattle, the father I'd once been to Russell, wasn't gone after all. He'd been buried under layers of hurt and anger, waiting for the chance to emerge again. That night, after everyone left, I found myself adding a framed photo of Russell to our mantel. It belonged there, alongside the life Grace and I had built. "I never thought I'd have this again," I admitted to Grace as we got ready for bed. "A complete family." She smiled, touching my face gently. "You never lost it, Felix. You just needed to find your way back." For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I felt truly whole. Not because the past had been erased, but because it had finally been reconciled with my present.
Bye.